Hey, Citylight family, welcome back to the Citylight Family Podcast. It is our desire this would equip you and encourage you for the work of ministry along the way. So thank you for joining us. I'm Chris Oreska, one of the co-lead pastors at Citylight Omaha.
And I'm Jared Cleaver, one of the co-lead pastors at Providence Church in Omaha.
Come on. We're back today and we're talking about what does the gospel have to do with our culture? So what is a gospel-centered culture and how do we cultivate it? How do we identify it? How do we try to protect it? And so that's the question. And as we jump into this 100% matters because what we've realized is that it is very possible to have gospel-centered doctrine, right? Churches that on their website, you go, statement of faith is all about the person and work of Jesus. Really great news for justification and sanctification and glorification and what he has done for us and all the promises of who Jesus is. And we love it. Listen, there's a lot to celebrate in gospel doctrine. God has initiated a relationship. God has empowered us to fight sin. God has made us a spiritual family. Christ Jesus has given himself generously to us. Jesus has served and not come to be served. Like the gospel doctrine is beautiful. It changes your heart from God is distant. He's a rule maker. He's just some angry creator who's disappointed in me to, wow, it should stir our hearts with affection for God. A lot of churches with what we would call gospel doctrine. And by the way, we should celebrate that,
yeah,
okay?
That's a good thing.
But when you zoom out, you go to the church on Sunday, you might experience gospel doctrine, but not gospel culture. It's possible to have domineering leadership. It's possible to have a church that has weird power dynamics, that is only accepting to people that are like them, that has no joy. So there's symptoms here that churches and even we as leaders can define the gospel, we can defend the gospel, but we can actually not be practicing the gospel in the way that we live and relate to one another. So
are you saying that it's not okay to believe the right things, but then be a jerk to everyone?
Yeah, I'm kind of saying,
okay, I'm just making clear.
Just saying that.
Okay.
So, and one of the reasons I'm just going to come out and say this matters to me so much is, first of all, we have the best news in the whole world.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, this really matters. He said, the world will recognize you and they will know you as Christians, by your love for one another,
yeah.
right? There's something about this corporate body, this
Yeah.
church, right? This multi-generational, very diverse, people with self-righteous backgrounds, people with rebellious backgrounds, people from broken homes, solid homes, wherever they are, there's something about how the gospel allows us to be peacemakers, to be generous, to be forgiving, to be loving, to reorient our lives around serving one another for their good and for God's glory.
Yeah.
And that should be a testimony to the watching world.
Yeah.
Just as much as our good news proclamation.
Yeah.
And so I think it's in my bones. I think it's in your bones. We want to contest for this. We want to encourage you as listeners. This is what we're aiming for across the Citylight family.
Oh, yeah. It's how we're set apart. It's how, we're uniquely different within the church. It's how we're a witness outside of the church. It's how we're that holy nation that it talks about in 1 Peter 2, that the watching world looks and they say, wait, there's something unique about those people. There's something different about those people. And that should point people to God so they can see God, the goodness of Jesus, the good news. And so, it's a big deal.
Come on now. So is this even biblical? So Jared, this is a great idea. Is this just kind of like young guys ripping on an idea that, the gospel-centered idea is kind of really trendy right now? Or is this actually biblically rooted in something that the church has been practicing for thousands of years?
Fortunate for us, I think it is actually in the Bible.
Yeah.
15 years ago, I preached my first sermon ever, and it was in Galatians 2.
Come on.
Actually, your co-lead pastor gave me the assignment, Gavin.
Come on.
So I was an intern at the time, didn't know what I was doing. A very subpar sermon. But one of the things that popped out, it was in Galatians 2, and before you get to the "for I've been crucified with Christ" part, you go back up and you get this awkward situation with Paul and Peter, but Paul calls out Peter. But one of the interesting things that he says in Galatians 2:14, Paul talking about Peter, he says, "But when I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel."
Yes.
And so there's this truth, this right belief or truth that you were talking about before, but there is a set of implications of how we act that come with that. And so you can believe the right thing, but you can actually be out of step with the gospel. And what we're saying is we want to bring all of our lives, our church, in step with the gospel. And I think you see that reflected in the New Testament by all of these. We receive something vertically, and then we're supposed to act it out horizontally. In the New Testament, you see all these one another commands. I think there's 50 some of them. In the New Testament, we're supposed to love for one another, bear one another's burdens. We're supposed to pray for one another, forgive one another. Like it goes on and on and on, because the gospel actually has a culture. There's a way that you can be like in step with the truth of the gospel. And that's what we want our churches to be about. We want people who are listening, who are working in these Citylight family churches, to act in line or in step with the truth of the gospel. And so, as we see this, how are some ways that we can identify this, or what are the ways that this gospel culture can work out or maybe not work out?
Right. Let me just give us some handles on it, right? Because you got to start thinking. So in the church, how does the gospel shape power dynamics, right? So in the world, if you're the CEO, if you're the one with all the power, everyone is there to serve you. Does it make sense? And so, but what we see in Christ is he's the King of heaven, the Prince of heaven. He's come to earth. And what's his style of leadership? He basically tells them, hey guys, his disciples, we are not going to lord over people like the religious leaders at the time. Instead, I'm going to take a towel and I'm going to wash the disciples' feet.
Unbelievable.
And it's upside down leadership where the people with the most responsibility, right? Maybe the most gifting, the highest level of leadership, they're supposed to be the chief servants to the church. So what does it mean to be an elder? What does it mean to be a pastor? What does it mean to be somebody that other people are looking to? You don't say, you are all here to serve me. Fall in line. Here's your commanding and marching orders. You say, I'm showing up to serve you. I'm going to make the meal to serve you. I'm going to teach to bless and encourage you. I'm going to labor for your good. And we take on the posture of leader. So this is one of the ways that we're looking. So I would say dynamics in leadership. I would say another one would be, how do we respond to the weak, right? So when somebody falls into sin, how do we respond to them? How do we respond to somebody in suffering? This isn't just sin, but this is suffering. Suffering has landed on their home. You know, people try to avoid other people's messes. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Have you ever gotten a call from somebody who's like consistently that needy person? And I don't know if
I want to admit this, but keep going.
Maybe I'm that needy person in your life. But I don't know about you, but the flesh wants to avoid other people's drama. Right? It wants to pursue comfort, isolation, control. We do not want to be burdens with other people's problems. And yet the gospel is going to preach a different message to us. So how do you use power and leadership? How do you respond to the weak and the vulnerable? How are you with your materialistic goods? That preaches the gospel. Where do you let people in to your worst, not just your best? I think the gospel identifies all of those things. And so it starts to change how we look at relationships. I don't have to only tell you the best. I can tell you the worst. I don't have to run from you when your life is on fire. I want to move towards you. I don't want to condemn you in your sin, but I also don't want to make it indifferent. We should be a holy people fighting. I don't want to be a leader who says, you guys are all here to serve me. I want to be a leader who says, I'm here to serve you. And so those are some questions we're asking. And so,
I mean, can we talk just for a second? Like, think about like the culture of relationships that we see in our culture at large. Like, where do we get our cues from? Like, if you get your cues from Twitter, like, what does that teach us about how people relate to one another? It's like backbiting. It's like, you know, these crazy, like, you're hurling grenades at other people. You're trying to disprove them, trying to like cast them off, cancel people. Like, you're splitting off into tribes. And the gospel is literally the exact opposite of what we see in our culture with, you know, the classic cancel culture thing, but just the tribalism, the, you know, heaving grenades across the aisle and then just letting it blow up and leave and trying to like take other people down to lift ourselves up. The gospel is the exact opposite. Jesus is the exact opposite. You're putting yourself low. You're lifting others up and making much of Jesus in that. It's like a complete countercultural thing, right?
Totally different operating system. And I think in this cultural moment, what is happening is culture's pressing on our churches. Some Christians are just retreating for anybody different than them. Oh, that's a different ethnicity, social class, different political affiliation. We're running. Where I don't think Jesus ran from people who are different or broken. He actually came from heaven to seek and save them. So there was this incarnation to his ministry, this mission of, I'm actually going to move into darkness and bring life and actually bring redemption to it. So just all of those things. And then how do we relate to one another? Like you said, unfortunately, Jared, I think one of my burdens is being in church for 10 years and we preach the gospel of bearing with, forgiving, working towards reconciliation. But what happens in a city group is maybe somebody has conflict, and what do they immediately want to do? Leave the city group, go find a different city group, leave the church, find a different church. And oftentimes what happens is the magic of the local church is the beautiful gospel working out in our lives that allows me to forgive you, to say I'm sorry, to receive forgiveness and not just run in shame and guilt.
Yeah.
And I think that actually is what God wants to use to shape and form us, but also to tell the world there's a different way of
100%.
relating to each other.
Yeah.
So that's what gets me so excited, the opportunity for it. So Jared, let me just ask you, if you had to just tell some stories of like, hey, I have seen the gospel lived out in my church.
Yeah.
And these are little gospel moments.
Yeah.
That's not just the preaching of the gospel, but in the life of the church that you say, this gets me really excited.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that come to mind. One that I was just at church yesterday. We're in the hallway. A new guy was there asking me and someone else who is a part of our church core team, been there for 5 years, and said, hey, tell me about this church. What's different about it? Whatever. I'm like, I don't know if anything's different about it. And he chimed in and he's like, well, let me tell you something. He said, a couple of years ago, I lost my job and we didn't have, my wife and I didn't have, a ton of resources, and we needed to pay bills. And we were in a city group, but our city group had less than 10 people. It was like 6 people in it, 6 other people in it.
Yeah.
And he said, wouldn't you know, within the next week, it was either in the next week or 2 weeks, he said that we showed up at city group. They handed us a check for $2,500 to pay our bills for that month. And I'm like, okay,
Yep.
That's a little different.
Yep.
And the interesting thing even about the gospel culture piece is it requires something of us. It requires a sacrifice. It's not easy. It's not our first instinct. Yeah. But it does something like that. Another thing that comes to mind, a couple years ago, we had a young girl in our church who lost her husband. And talk about people walking through suffering. It's the height of trying to it's
massive
just the worst.
Loss.
Yeah,
Massive loss.
just the worst. And I was able to be a part of the funeral, and I remember we talked off and on during the course of the morning, but as I looked out in the crowd, there was a whole section of people, and there wasn't a ton of people in the room, but there's a whole section of people, a third of the people in the room were just a city group crew that was there of this girl, of her city group. And then afterwards, like you would expect, this girl was just broken down in tears afterwards as everyone was walking out, making their way out. And I look one moment and she's, broken down in the hallway. I looked back the next moment and her closest friend from the city group was there with her, sitting down. And I'm like, that's it,
just
right?
Moving towards her. Yes.
Just unbelievable. Just an act of selflessness to be present. That's not convenient.
Nope.
Not easy.
Yes.
Not simple, but just beautiful. A beautiful display. And it's I think that is the gospel, kind of bearing one another's burdens that he invites us into. It's crazy. We just had a refugee family come around to our church, and some people met them. People have invited them into their home, and all of a sudden some city groups caught wind of it, and people are literally sending checks.
Come on.
People are going, they're like, hey, we got a couch to pick up, and somebody say, oh, I got a truck. Somebody else is meeting them there, picking up this thing, moving it into their new apartment. It's this giant team effort to welcome people with the welcome of God, because we were far off. Yeah, we were outsiders. We were the outcasts. Jesus comes and gets us, but he doesn't just give us this, backseat. He welcomes us with, he throws a party. It's it's unbelievable. And so it's just fun to see that stuff in the church, where it's more than just, hey, we're learning and we're becoming smarter people. I'm becoming more mature or whatever. I mean, that's great, right? It's great to become smarter, to get more Bible knowledge. but to see it actually worked out in the life of the people who are treating each other like family,
Come on.
who are coming beside people who are hurting,
Yes.
who are sacrificing their own resources for other people. It's like, it's a real thing.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
It's the gospel
It's
being
the
lived out.
gospel lived out.
Yeah.
Like you just named it. So the church is moving towards widows
Yeah.
that's not something that comes out of the flesh that says this person has something to offer. It's uncomfortable. Moving towards the refugee, the outsider that's new to this. They have no social network.
Yeah.
They need tons of help. They're a massive need. And yet that's exactly how we came
Yeah.
to the foot of the cross.
100%,
And so
yeah.
all that, it makes me so happy. So
What about you? Like how have you
man.
seen this play out in your church?
well, you can tell we get excited. So if you're listening, you're like, man, these guys are fired up. This is the best part of the church, is
Yeah.
seeing Jesus lived out in the life of his people. But I would say a couple things. There's a widow in our church right now who's going through some health problems. And she's kind of been a part of our team and been a part of the church from the early days, very lonely, doesn't have an extensive social network, strained relationship with kids, and going through health issues and in and out of the hospital. And you just get the sense that we're coming to the end in some ways. And yet has a beautiful love for Jesus, serves the church with what she has. And what I see in our church is there's these medical professionals that are being her advocate, going to the ER with her, helping to explain to her where we're at in the process, asking great questions, protecting her from maybe treatments that she doesn't need, and just making sure she is getting the best treatment. What a beautiful way to serve the church. These medical professionals have real families, real jobs, and yet they're saying, hey, we're going to get in our car after our shift and go check in on this dear sister. And then sending out text messages to me and other pastors, hey, she's in this room, come visit her. Hey, here's how you can pray today. Just being an advocate, loving the widow, seeing the need, stepping in. And by the way, Jared, that is not an organized program. That's just the life of the church.
Dude, I love that.
And so sometimes ministry,
Yeah.
just so you're listening, ministry leaders, we sometimes think we got to have the environment, we got to have the program. But sometimes the gospel culture is the most beautiful thing. It's not happening in the life of a program.
Yeah.
It's just happening in
Yeah.
the life of the church.
100%.
So I would say that. And then we just started this men's ministry, 6 a.m. Jared, 6 a.m.
That's
in the
not my
morning.
style, but
Bro,
go ahead.
I'm convinced that Jesus made disciples after lunch. It's so painful to discipline my body. But I'm sitting around this table. You have a corporate executive. You have a newlywed guy. You have a retired Marine who's 70 years old. He's a brand new Christian, been sober from alcohol for literally a year. And so you have these different characters at this table. And what's happening is they're all sharing their pain points. I don't know how to set boundaries with my mother-in-law. I don't know how to be 70 and single and actually stay away from sexual sin. I don't know how to get past my control idol, and it's messing up my relationship with my family. Wow.
Yeah.
And you're sitting at the table saying, where else are different kind of men all free to confess their worst and not just boast about their best? Right? And so I'm just feeling like, wow, the gospel is the only place that sets you free, because you know that your righteousness is in the perfection of Jesus Christ. Your sins can be forgiven. And so now we're just sojourners. We're just brothers that are walking in grace, trying to pursue holiness and live out what God would call us to. So I just see the freedom to say, here's where I need Christ today.
Yeah.
And what's natural is hiding. Posing, comparing, competing. The gospel creates a different kind of culture. And I'm so thankful for that.
Dude, I love that, because there's nowhere naturally in our culture, not around a Starbucks table, you're going to find that grouping of people unless they're united in Christ.
Right.
And then they're not only doing that, but they're like leaning in
Yes.
and experiencing life. That's so cool.
So, Jared, I'll just real quickly, if you had to say, here's a few markers of a gospel-centered culture, just give me 2 or 3 that you're like, just be looking for these little things in a gospel-centered culture.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think just generosity in the church. You see people giving of themselves to other people. It could be financial, but it's just time, effort, energy. In the gospel, we find God being generous to us by giving Jesus giving his life. And so there's a sense of generosity. I think also there's a sense of reconciled relationships. And so where we want to, our natural thing, whether it's in our marriages, in our friendships, amongst family, friends, or whatever, the easiest thing is to go and retreat when things get difficult, when things are hard. But in the gospel, we find reconciliation. God reconciles us to himself through Jesus, and we reconcile to one another through forgiving one another and moving toward each other, like that intentional thing. I think another thing is just being like hospitable and welcoming, opening up your home, having people come in. And this can be like just even before you invite people to your dining room table. It can be like in a church, it's a good thing when people linger after a gathering and you're just seeing people talking. Like it's a good thing when somebody has to kick people out after 45 minutes or an hour. That's and then also just welcoming people in. Like we were once far off. We've been welcomed into the family of God. It's a beautiful thing. And we can welcome people in, have people into our homes, be hospitable, make people dinner, help people feel loved through that. Those are just a few things. I don't know if you have.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think confessing sin, I've already touched on it. I think just continually living as a sense of family, living out the one another's in relationship. Again, the power dynamics to me are big just because I am somebody who's in a place of positional leadership. Yeah. I'm always trying to say, God, help me to pattern my leadership where I speak life, I look to serve. This doesn't become about how much more can I take or get, or how can I use this for my own glory. Yeah. So I just, again, those churches, it makes me simultaneously just rejoicing, like you said, those little markers in a church. How does a congregation sing together? Like, is there a sense of rejoicing that God has actually taken their sin away and taken their shame and they're ready to respond in worship? That doesn't mean all your circumstances in life are better or easy, but it does mean you have a good God. I look at congregations and churches and say, are they fighting sin or are they indifferent towards it? Yeah. I think the gospel would call us to be a holy, set apart people. And so you want to see each other spurring each other on, saying, hey, there's grace for you, bro. But let's continue to fight in battle against the flesh. So I will also just confess before we transition is, Jared, we're doing this podcast because you and I have had to practice gospel-centered forgiveness and reconciliation. Did I ever sin against you in the past?
I mean, how many details?
Whatever you want to say.
Well, I mean, it involves a game of cornhole.
Cornhole, yes.
And then just a little, trick to peg me with a beanbag.
I might have thrown a beanbag at your chest.
It was, about 55 miles an hour.
A little bit more aggressive than I should.
Well, I was looking, and I almost
choked me out.
Yeah.
I could see the anger of the wrath of God boiling up in your face.
Yes, and I wanted to run after you, and I, like immature middle school Jared came out in my full adult stature, and I did want to choke you out and kill you.
Which I'm so thankful you did not do that.
It would have been interesting to see me trying to chase you around.
It would have been
our neighbor, our friend's backyard to see what happened.
Yes.
But here's what happened. I actually was I was legitimately upset at the moment.
Yes.
You may have been able to tell.
No.
But here's the beautiful thing. The next week, I woke up one day and I'm like, I feel convicted about this. I could be mad or I could do something about it. And I'm like, I need to call this dude. I need to call him. And so I decided on a whim to go to a local coffee place that I don't usually go to. And I walked in, and who was sitting inside right in front of the door? You were there.
There.
You were sitting there.
I'll never
I'm
forget
like,
it.
Okay, it's on now. And so I had to forgive you for throwing a beanbag at me.
Right. We had to have that conversation in the middle of the coffee shop as two pastors. But bro, it was so awesome because I could tell you cared enough about the relationship not to sit in bitterness, not to sit in unforgiveness, but to say, hey, this bothered me and I want to confess that. And anyways, forgiveness was expressed. I felt like real reconciliation. I strengthened our relationship. So just so you guys know, we are trying to practice the gospel in our friendship. And so thank you, Jared, for speaking truth, showing grace, doing the work. It's, I think, what it means to be gospel-centered men and have a gospel-centered friendship. Yeah. And we'll talk more about that in other podcasts.
I want to thank you for going 18 months in a row without throwing another beanbag at me. So this is life change, sanctification.
We're making progress.
Yeah.
We're making progress.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I just want everyone out there to just know they can have hope. They can graduate from throwing beanbags in the backyard at other grown men.
Okay, so when it comes to gospel culture, we're a part of a big family here.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you look around the family, what's, maybe an example of one person, one church, one leader, or maybe you have a couple that you just have to come out of you, but example of someone who's like just exhibiting the gospel culture.
Yes. I will say Sarah Butenbach is an amazing gospel leader here at Omaha at our church. One of the things she does is just connects with everyone. And so one thing she did at like a Thanksgiving dinner one year where it was literally everyone who didn't really have a place to go. So orphans, widows, refugees, outcasts, people with strained relationships. No one was inviting them to a table. And I just saw the way that she made space for them. And I thought, man, that's the gospel. I think about Austin Edwards down in Lincoln. Crazy, the amount of just good and hard trials he's walked through. And yet when you get around him, there's a buoyancy of joy. I mean, it's just like the guy fights off discouragement with the promises of the gospel. He smiles, he tells stories, he feels grateful to be a part of a church that has really good problems. Like we don't have enough room for other people because we got all these college kids and we don't have a big budget, and my co-lead transitioned and we're constantly have to hiring people, and there's a lot of reasons he could be burnt out, and yet he just exudes the joy of the Lord. I would say one of the church plants out in South Lincoln, they saw the need of some other churches across the Citylight family down in Iowa, and they called their church to say, we want to give thousands and thousands of dollars before we ever receive anything else from our end of the year giving. We're going to give the first thousands of dollars away to another church plant. It just showed, hey, they're participating in the kingdom of God. This is not about us, our security, our budget. The first thing we want to do is give to the Lord and give to others. It was, like you said, the gospel should make us generous.
Yeah.
And it should be more blessed to give than receive. And they were practicing it. I was like, man, that is so awesome. That they're trying to flex that spiritual discipline.
That is cool. I think so. Just to call it greatness in you personally and you guys. One, I think that you just have an incredible, a posture of encouragement and generosity. That's the way that you've been toward me personally, just a great friend, encourager. Yes. You're sending out like texts to just it's biblical to encourage one another. You're there, you're doing that, but you're just sacrificing your life. You're opening up your home and doing that. And I think that's your church has picked that up from you. I think it was about the third year of our church plant where I realized, we were like our church was like the child that doesn't realize that mom and dad have like paid for everything all along, and they've given us everything all along. We've lived in your basement as offices. We lived in your basement as a gathering during COVID, and Citylight Omaha has been incredibly generous, and the fuel of that generosity has paid dividends in the kingdom. So God has used it in incredible ways. So
thanks, Jared. Well, let's all keep paying that grace forward. So, thank you again. I think this was a great podcast. Again, church, be mindful. If we have any encouragement for young leaders as they're listening, other leaders, how does this happen? How does this gospel-centered culture, if there's some takeaways for them, is there anything you'd be encouraging them to be thinking about? How do they start to live this out in their churches?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, you just want to recognize what this gospel culture is. So as we're talking about this, make the mental note of this and start looking around and notice where it's happening or maybe where it isn't happening.
Yeah.
And you as a ministry leader, there's a sense or there's a definite calling to where you're called to model this.
Yes.
So where you can create family, where you can be generous, where you can welcome people in, where you can walk with sufferers, do that, model that, walk with those people because you are a leader and other people are looking at you, and what you do and what you create will be recreated by other people around you. And so I think just noticing it, modeling it, and then I think it's a huge thing, which I think you do so well, is celebrating it, calling it out. So if you celebrate things, if you call them out, they're going to get recreated. They're going to it's going to get repeated. And so we need to be people who watch others as they're exhibiting this gospel culture and say, hey, I noticed this. That was great. You're living out the gospel. You're giving up your life for the gospel to encourage them and spur them on to keep doing it and to let others take notice of like, oh yeah, that is the gospel.
Yeah.
I should get on that too, so.
Yep. I love it. Well, that's super helpful. That's all we want to do before we close this one down is just put some tangible tools in you guys' hands and hopefully equip you to both kind of police gospel culture, but also cheerlead it and model it and cultivate it. And so, again, thank you for all the ways that you guys who are listening are leading, loving, and serving the local churches that you're part of. We do want to pray that God would give us a heart to both define the gospel, defend the gospel, but also model and practice gospel-centered culture. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much.